Hello again, I'm Wendy J. Haney, and today I'm going to show you how to make this very cool block. It is called water wheel. I've also seen it referred to as Chinese coin and something else that, you know what, we're not going to talk about that one. But anyway, the cool thing with this is it looks kind of complicated, but it's really not. It's a bunch of half square triangles and 4 patches, which, heck, you know how to do those by now, I'm sure. And if not, I'm going to show you how. And I'm going to show you how to do it very easily. And for you beginners out there, all of these methods that I'm going to show you give you a little bit of wiggle room to trim up. So you're going to have a nice exact block. The other cool thing with this block is there's a lot of different ways that you can take the squares and the fabrics and twist them and get a little bit different look to the block by changing your colors. I went with a 2 color scheme layout. I've seen this done in 3 also. I've also seen people put a 4 patch in the middle. So I'm going to be playing with some things later and show you what you can do with this block once you've got the basics down. But for now, I'm going to show you how to make this block. So what you need for this block is we're dealing with 4 patches for our corners, 4 half square triangles, and then a square in the middle. Pretty easy. I'm working with a 12-inch block, and essentially this is a 9 patch. Square, 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 so it's 3 by 3, it's a 9 patch. Therefore, if we want to do a 12-inch block, 12 divided by 3 is 4, meaning these are finished 4-inch blocks or unfinished 4.5. That means this middle square here has to be a 4.5-inch square. And when we're making each of these, we're going to make 4.5-inch squares in order to put them all together. If you wanted to go with a smaller block size, like a 9, basically I would suggest you do a block size that's nicely divisible by 3. Generally, 3, or if you want to do a 3-inch block, you go for it, not me. A 6, 9, or a 12 is a nice size for blocks. I went with a 12 because then, especially for a beginner, you're not working with super small 4 patches here. Okay, I also went with 2 colorways, which is the most simplest to go with. Okay, so we're going to need, for our 4 patches, you need about 22 to 23 inches strip of each fabric. And as I said, I'm going with having you cut your fabric larger than you need so that you can trim them up and therefore be more precise. Hey, if you're a quilter and you already know you've got a great 1/4 inch seam and you don't want to have the extra step of trimming, then go for it. You don't need to worry about it. So our 4 patches are 4.5-inch blocks, which means if you divide 4.5 by 2, each of these strips have to be 2.25 inches. And so we're going to have you trim those down. So we're going to add a 1/2 inch to each of your strips. So you're going to cut your strips 2.75. So 2 3/4 inches you're going to cut your strips. And then you're going to have room to trim off and square them up. If you don't want to do that, then you're going to cut 2.25 inch strips and then you won't have any trimming. So you need about a 1/2 width of fabric. Kind of depends on your width of fabric. So personally, when I'm doing this, even for 1 block, I'm cutting a full width of fabric of each strip. Okay, for our blue, so that you need for your yellow and your blue, your 2 3/4 inch strips, cut 1 strip of each. Okay, for our blue, well, we need a 4.5 inch square in the middle. Okay, that's easy. Then, for our half square triangles, we're very lucky. They're all identical, which means we can make 4 half square triangles at one time. Yep, this is a way I'm going to show you to make 4 half square triangles exactly the same, and you get to trim them up. So for a 4.5 inch block, you need a square of 7¼ has you trim a little. If you're a little more worried, go with a 7½ inch square. I just happen to go with a 7½ inch square, so that's what you're going to see me trimming from. And it gives us quite a bit of wiggle room in trimming off. So try a 7¼ if you'd prefer not to have that much to trim off. I'm going to show you how to do that. And so you need a 7½ inch square for each color, your blue and your yellow. Okay, so let's get started cutting. We're going to start with our 4 patches. Okay, as I mentioned, I like to just cut a full width of fabric, even though I don't need quite that much. So here I have my blue, and you know what? Excuse the adjustment of the camera here. There we go. So we get that in there. I've been cutting on this already, so I know I have a straight edge. If I was worried about a straight edge, I would have taken one ruler along here on the edge, made sure it was straight, and then I'd put this ruler here and make sure I had a good straight cut. And actually, you know, looking at that right now, here's the thing, even though if you think you have a straight one, if you've gone back to the ironing board and ironed it, or if you've cut a variety of strips from it, well, guess what? It gets unstraight very quickly. So I can see that I need to do that. So you're going to see me square this up. Yep. A little bit there. Okay. So we're going to just trim this up. Now I have a nice straight edge. And as I said, we're doing 4½ inch 4 patches, and we're going to allow you to trim them up. So we're cutting our strips to 1, 2, and 3/4 inches. Okay, and I am not going to cut, normally what I would do, especially if I'm going to make multiple blocks, I would cut some more of those, or I would also cut my 7½ inch square and my 4½ inch square that I need for my center and half square triangles. But I've already have a strip of fabric that I've been using, and I don't want to cut another strip of 7½ inch wide out of this if I don't have to. So I'm optimizing my fabric. Okay, then my yellow, I'm going to do the same thing. Let's see how straight we've got this puppy. Are we good with... Oh yeah, this one, as I said, I've been using this fabric as I've been practicing cutting my blocks, so I'm pretty comfortable cutting this as it is. Okay, so 2 3/4 inch strip. And once again, I am not going to cut the bigger squares out of it because I'm going to cut those out of another piece of fabric. Okay, so what I do is I would go to the ironing board and press out my humps in the middle. Yep, I would do that. Then I come back here, and in this case, my batik really hardly has a selvage. The yellow definitely does. So I'm going to kind of nudge my batik down so I can optimize, you know, not hitting that selvage, but at the same time optimizing my blue. Now, I pin a lot, but a lot of times, I'm gonna do this a little bit here. A lot of times with strips, I don't. What I do is I take it to the sewing machine and I sew, and then I stop, and then I adjust it, and I sew. I get a little further, and I just kind of keep adjusting as I'm sewing, rather than taking the time to pin an entire strip of fabric. That optimizes getting that done. So that's what I'm gonna go do with that after I iron the hump out of the middle. Oh, and as you'll notice, yeah, my batik, you're going, wait a minute, your batik is, yeah, my batik is right side together. The batik is one of those fabrics that, half the time it's the same color on both sides. And if anybody tells you you can't combine batiks with regular fabrics, they're crazy. There's no quilting police. You can do whatever you want. I love my batiks, but at times they're a really nice combination. I love the color of one of them that goes with some regular fabric I've got. Okay, I am gonna go and sew my strip together and then show you what we'll do next with this 4-patch. Now we have our strip of our 2 colors of fabric sewn together. I have already been to the ironing board. I did a finger press first and then I pressed it to the dark. Okay, this edge here I'm going to trim up so that I don't inadvertently get a piece of salvage in my 4-patch that I don't want. So I'm going to trim off as little as possible, but still get that salvage off. Okay, on the other end here, yep, kind of got the same thing going on. So once again, I'm gonna just trim off that edge. Okay, then what I do is I fold it in half, get to the other end, and put a crease in it. Yep. It doesn't need to be exact. And then I come back and where my crease was, this case I do want my cut straight. So I put my line on the seam and I cut it in half. Okay, biggest thing is, yep, I'm good because I want to make sure I have enough fabric for the 4 patches I need. So here's how we're going to do this. So you take one of your cuts. So now here's your original strip. I've cut them in half. You're going to put them together with your colors opposite of each other. Essentially, this is how we're going to create our 4 patch. Okay? So I have a nice sharp edge on one end, so I can safely line that up and it'll be the beginning of my 4 patch. What you want to do is have your seams nudged up next to each other, nice and nested. And you know what? I usually do it at one end. I go to the other end and do the same thing, and then I just kind of go along in the middle and nudge it. I nudge this one up towards the other. And I know you maybe see here that I've got some yellow popping out. This is fine. This is the reason we're doing the trim up method for our 4 patches. We don't need to worry too much. Okay, so I've got that. Yeah. Now, you've got it laid out. Now you're going to want to be careful here. This is a good size ruler. This is a 6.5 inch square. Our strips we cut were 2 3/4 inches. That means after you put these on top of each other, opposite sides, remember, nesting the seams, we need to subcut these into the same length strips, 2 3/4 inches. So I'm going to just take my ruler, and what I do is I find a nice line. In this case, it's my 3-inch line there in the middle, and I put that on my seam. So I use my seam as my straight, well, my straight perspective along the lines. So that I have even on a line to keep it straight for my seam. I've got 2 3/4 inches over there. Oops. And if you don't have your ruler move, There we go. And if you're careful, you should be able to lift up your ruler, move it over. So where you cut is 2.75 inches. 2, and we need 4 sets of these. Now, if one of these happens to move, oh well, so be it. It's not the end of the world. We can line these up again. 2.75 inches and 2.75 inches. Okay, as you can see here, I have more than enough for more. I'm going to set that aside because guess what? I'll be using it again later. If you're making more blocks, then just by all means, keep chopping up your 2 3/4 inch subcuts, and then you can make whole bunch of 4 patches all at the same time. Okay, as you can see with this one, it kind of came apart. It's no longer nice and pretty. That's all right. Line it up again, get your seams nested, and here's where I do pin these. So I take mine, and if I'm lucky, they're all nice together still, and I don't have to adjust them. But I pin them before going to the ironing. No, we need to sew first, we iron second. So I'm going to take these, and as you can see, I'm pinning. We're going to stitch 1/4 inch on one edge of the long side of the seam. So you're going to cross your seam. This is what is going to make your 4 patches. Okay, so we take those to the sewing machine and stitch 1/4 inch on each of those edges, and you're going to get 4 patches. They're going to look like this. 4 patches are like the perfect block to do a pinwheel pressing in the middle. So I open it up and I just twist that middle seam in there, and that way one seam goes one direction and the other goes the other, and it really makes that center nice and flat. Otherwise it can be a little bulky. And then I flip it over and I realize, okay, I'm going to finger press that and finger press that. Okay, and then you take it to the iron and you press it. And what's the chance I have one already pressed? I do. Look at there. Look at there. This one is already pressed. Now we need to trim it up. Now, sure, this is what happens. I move things. I am partial to a custom ruler called 4-Patch Square Up by Deb Tucker's Studio 180s Designs. It's handy. It makes it really easy to trim up my 4 patches and make sure they're perfect. But if you don't have one of these rulers, that's okay. Here's my 6.5 inch ruler again. This is a 4.5. This needs to be, when we're done trimming it, 4.5 inches, which means each side right now needs to be 2.25 inches. So this to here should be 2.25, that to there is 2.25, and the same this way, which means if you bring your ruler and you find the 2.25 inch mark, that should go on this seam, and make sure it's straight all the way down. Then find the 2.25 inch mark this way. So you want to take that and square it up. So you've got a 2.25 inch line there across your seam, a 2.25 inch across the seam there, and then we're going to trim the 2 sides. Okay? And then you twist it. Now, in this case, it should be a lot easier because you should be able to do 4.5, 4.5, and everything should line up, making sure I'm still at 2 1/4 on my center, and I'm 2 1/4 at my cross. Actually, whoops, I almost goofed. I almost cut it 4 3/4 one way because I double checked. And I went, that's not right. 2 1/4 inch this way, 2 1/4 that way. I should have 4 1/2 there and 4 1/2 there. I set it there. Bingo. I'm trimming up. Yep, I'm trimming up, yeah, about 1/4 inch on each side. So the nice thing about the Deb Tucker ruler is that it tells you exactly what size strips to cut based on what size finished square you need. So here we wanted a finished square of 4 inches, so we cut our strips 2 3/4. Basically, you add a 1/2 inch to, let me back that up. If you don't have the ruler and you want to make strips to trim them up, take your unfinished size block, which is 4 1/2, divide it by 2. So 4 1/2 divided by 2 is 2 1/4. Then add a 1/2 inch and you get your 2.75 inch strips. Okay? So with Deb Tucker's, it's really nice because it basically goes, hey, there's the center for your 4 inch block. There's your dotted lines. There's a 4 1/2 inch mark. So basically you have all the lines to quickly square it up. And you know what though? Yes, this one's a little quicker because I don't have to do as much double checking with all the lines on this ruler. It accomplishes the exact same thing. It's just a matter of what you're more comfortable with and whether you want to spend the money on another ruler. I will give you a link in the description for those rulers, actually for both of the rulers that I used. All right, so now I'm going to go trim the rest of my blocks, and then we're going to figure out the half square triangles. Now that we have our 4 patches done, it's time to tackle our half square triangles. And we're going to cut that middle square at the same time. Okay, half square triangles, when you need 4 of them that are identical, the easiest way to do this is to start with one large block. And in this case, for a 4 1/2 inch unfinished half square triangle, leaving you room to trim, you can probably get by with a 7 1/4 inch square, but I'm hedging, giving you a little more room to trim, and you'll be totally great with a 7 1/2 inch square. Okay, so as I mentioned, I have fabric that I've already been playing with. And let's grab an 8 1/2 inch square. So I'm going to take this piece of fabric, and I know I cut it a straight strip that's 8 inches. So I'm just putting my 7 1/2 inch line on these 2 sides and trimming up 2 sides, and now I have my 7 1/2 inch square for my half square triangle. And the same is for this. Yeah. So 7 1/2 on the side. And if you do this and discover, oh, yeah, mine's not quite accurate anymore, I just hedge it over a little. So I've got 7 1/2 inch straight at the bottom. I can cut straight here, straight at the top, pull it up, turn it around. So I need to trim this side to make sure it's completely straight. And if you're, doing things this way and not making strips of fabric, maybe you want to do this, scrappy with a lot of stuff and you're cutting individual blocks. This works great. Okay, so now we have our 7 1/2 inch pieces for a half square triangle. And since I'm here, what's the chance this piece here buggers. Nope. Nope. We're gonna have to get my 4.5-inch center from this piece here. Yep, that'll work. I do my best to try and optimize. Whoopsie. Doing it that way, my corners always get a little tricky. Try and optimize my fabric uses, especially when I'm just totally winging it what I'm using. Okay, so now we've got our middle square as well. Okay, let's do half square triangles. This is such an easy method. And the first time I saw it done, I was watching the video and I went, how is this gonna work? And then when you see it done, you go, oh my gosh, so cool. Okay, put your fabrics right sides together. I'll do it this way so it's easier for you to tell right and wrong. Put your squares right side together. Pin them. Yes, pin them. And then we need to have it and put some music in when I'm pinning things, so I don't have to come up with things to talk to you about. Okay, I got my pinning done. Now, you take this to the sewing machine and you stitch 1/4 inch on all 4 sides. You do not need to pivot in the corner. 1/4 inch, cut. 1/4 inch cut, 1/4 inch cut. Now, if I were making a flippin' ton of these, I'd be chain piecing where I would be doing this edge, 1/4 inch. I'd have another block. I would start right away, 1/4 inch, and I'd get all my blocks done, trim them, separate them, chain piece the next side. In this case, we're dealing with just one, okay? So we're going to stitch 1/4 inch around every side. Okay, and then you end up with that. Yep, I've got a 1/4 inch seam on all 4 sides. Okay, now you need a ruler big enough, whoops. And if you're working with squares this size, an 8.5 inch ruler ain't gonna cut it. Now, I could easily use my big ruler, but we're gonna cut this way and then this way. And if I'm dealing with a really big ruler, it gets in the way. So I have this, oh seriously? What did I do with it? Oh man. Oh, there it is. I'm always losing my ruler. This ruler is perfect for this. It is a 6x12. That way it fits perfectly corner to corner. And when I want to turn it like this, it's not too bulky that I'm apt to screw things up. Okay, now if you have a rotating mat, this would be the perfect time for you to get it out and use it. Diagonal that way, don't touch it. This is why I say having a manageable size ruler for this helps. And then I turn like this, and I trim it the other way. Okay, we have, guess what? Guess what? Wait for it, wait for it! We have 4 half square triangles! Woohoo! Wasn't that easy? Like I said, this block is really pretty, and it looks a little complicated, but it's really not. So we're gonna finger press all 4 sides. I always do my seams to the dark, so I finger press first. I've really found finger pressing first, and granted, I got nice nails that do the job. Finger pressing first, then taking them to the ironing board and pressing them. Okay, we got 4 of those, and I already have a set pressed. Now we need to trim them up. In this case, our 6.5 inch square ruler does the job. So, the Omni Grid ruler, I love this for so many reasons. It has the lines I need and the diagonal. This block, this square, needs to end up 4.5 inches. So, put the line, the diagonal on your seam, And then make sure it's adjusted such that you have stuff to trim off at the top, and you're 4.5 inches. 4.5 inches, 4.5 inches. So there's enough to trim. So if you had this down like here, you'd be trimming it all off the top, but you'd lost it at the bottom. And you really don't want to use your seam, you know, to do that. You get the cleanest block if you just slap this ruler kind of sort of in the middle, making sure 4.5 inches room to cut around, 4.5 inches on the top, your angle. Flip it over, put your ruler back on it. Now is where you line up your 4.5 inches on the side that you already cut, and your diagonal should still match the diagonal. And whoopsie, I'm going, wow, I'm not trimming much. That's because I had it on 4 3/4. I did that earlier today. So pay attention to your numbers on your ruler. 4.5, 4.5, point, angle. And look at there. A perfect half square triangle that is 4.5 inch squares. Your points go right into the corner. So you're going to go ahead and do this exact same trimming method. So go ahead and press. Always press your blocks before you do a trim up. That will help your accuracy tremendously as well. So press your half square triangles after you've cut them, press them, trim them, and then we're going to lay this baby out. Now that we have everything cut out and the key components pieced, it's time to put the bigger block together. Easiest thing, so we've got our half square triangles, our 4 patches, and our center square. Start with your center square. Add your 4 patches. Okay, based on what I'm doing with my colors in the middle, I've got a blue middle, which means I'm putting the opposite color outside, angling away. So all my 4 patches have my yellow touching my blue. Okay, there we go. Okay, then we start with 1 half square triangle, and I put that up here in the middle. And you know what? It's one of those things. This is one of those blocks that figure out the blocks the first time that the way you like in the layout, and then do one. Then use that to build on and look at and go, okay, where do my triangles go? And you'll know if they're a little off, but there's so many different ways that you can twist and turn this block. And I'm going to show you those later. So I put my starting block there, making sure my blue is my blue is next to my blue center. And then I take another one and then I turn it to the left. Okay? Once again, I'm keeping my blue next to my blue. I put this one here, I turn it to the left. It's still on my blue. I match this with that and turn it to my left. Basically, I just keep twisting my half square triangles to the left to ensure I've got this kind of star wheel thing in the middle, and all of my blues, my center square color is next to the half square triangle with the same color. Oh, I do so love this block. It is so pretty. Okay, now what we do is we sew things together. I generally work in rows. So what I do is I take that and flip it on. Actually, you can do it either way. In this case, based on how I want my seams up, I flip that over there, this over here, and that over there. And then you'll never guess what I'm going to do. Yep, I know. So I straighten out my blocks and I pin them. Yep, so you're going to do that for each of these. Straighten them out, pin them, and then take them to the sewing machine. And the other benefit of pinning is not just about keeping my pieces secure as I go to the sewing machine, which is over there. And sometimes it's further away depending on which machine I'm using. It also tells me that's the seam, that's the edge of my fabric that I want to stitch on. Otherwise, believe me, when I don't use pins and I pick things up and go, oh yeah, I know which one, and then I set them next to my sewing machine, I sew them up, oh crap, I sewed on the wrong side. Yep, so that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna sew those sides. So I have my pieces stitched together, and yeah, I didn't keep them very straight which was which, so I come back to my cutting mat. I put the middle in first, because that's pretty doggone obvious the direction that goes. And then I take this one, and I set it there and go, I don't think that looks right. That must go up here. And yep, there we go. So make sure your rows are oriented before you move to the next step. Once again, in this case, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to put the last row together. Flip it over, pin them, sew a 1/4 inch on each seam there. Now that we have each of our rows and we're back to placing them so we know they're looking exactly the way they need to be, now you're going to want to press your seams in opposite directions. Granted, here you don't exactly have a lot of seams either way. So it's a 6 one, 6 the other, which direction you want to press your seams. But in this case, I would probably press my seams. You know what? Points. Yeah, it really doesn't matter. Choose one. Basically, your top and the bottom, you're going to press your seams the same direction. In this case, I've chosen to press those seams in. My middle, I'm pressing my seams out. And the reason for doing this is because this way, your block will nest together very nicely. Okay, so finger press your seams and then take them to the ironing board and press them very nicely before moving on. Then you're going to come here, take the bottom row, put it on the top row, and yes, pin it. In this case, you really do. This is really the first step that you're actually needing to match your seams. So you've got your seam for fingers here for your blocks. That's why we pressed in opposite directions so that you could nicely nest those seams. And I always get my seams matched first. That way if I need to ease something in between, then I match the edge of the block and the final edge. And then if for any reason I have a little gap or a fullness, I put in another pin, okay? So we do that. Then, in this case, it's really easy to do both of these at the sewing machine at the same time. Go ahead and fold this down, okay? So now you've got your middle in the middle again, and you're gonna take your top row and set it over top of that. Key thing, make sure this bottom row stays folded over so you don't get it sucked into the middle there. And I'm going to, yeah, I need to take mine to the ironing to press it, but then I'm going to pin that seam. I'm going to match that seam, pin my edges, so then I can take it to the sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch of where I pinned, making sure that this other block stays folded and out of the way. Once this block is done, you can take your pins out, open it up, and then open up this one and sew your 1/4 inch on this seam. And then you're golden. And guess what happens when you're done doing that? You take it to the ironing board and you press it. Now, when you press it, these middle 4 corners are once again the perfect opportunity to do a pinwheel. So actually that worked really well for me. In this case, I had put my center seams in and them outer that way. So either way, you should be able to pinwheel. So just twist that seam and pinwheel it, and that will eliminate some bulk in your corners. And then you have your finished block. Now don't go away, because I'm going to make up a few more blocks with a little bit different variation so you can see what some of the options are for you. Basically, it's the same thing. The only thing one of them would have is you could put a 4 patch in the middle that would really change the look of things. Other than that, it's just about how you want to rearrange your blocks to have the layout look the way you want. And you can even add a 3rd color if you want. So don't go away. Another option you could do is to add a 3rd color to the mix. So if you notice, my 4 patches now have 3 colors instead of 2. So in this case, you're going to create strips of your in this case, my orange and yellow, so a color and a background color, and your second color and your background color. And then you're going to put them together. Then for my half square triangles, I only need to do 2 at a time because I have 2 of each color. And then we put an 4 patch of the 2 colors in the middle. I thought that was kind of a cool way of doing things. It gives it kind of a blocky jigsaw puzzle kind of design, yet at the same time, it's flowing with the, what do we call this? Too funny. Water wheel kind of concept. Otherwise, basically, you could take your half square triangles, your 4 patches, and a square in the middle and do so many different things with them. I flipped them around and did some different things, but essentially I end up moving away from the concept of the water wheel, which is kind of the star concept in the middle. Obviously, you could flip your colors on this. You could put your background color in the middle. You could go with a 3rd color in the middle. There's so many things that you could do with this. You just need to kind of play with it and try, or stick with the tried and true 2 colors standard format. So have some fun with it, see what you like, and play with it. And yeah, I'm kind of liking both of them actually. You know, they work. There we go. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care. Have a great day. Thank you so much for watching. I very much appreciate it. If you want to make sure you don't miss a single video I published, hit the subscribe button below and then hit the bell icon. And that way you will be notified whenever I publish a new video. But you can also find me over on Facebook, facebook.com/Wendy, the initial J, Haney. Or I have a Facebook group for those of you that love quilting, needlework, books, wine, and wellness. You can find that at facebook.com/groups/lifefulfilled. The name of the group is Life Fulfilled - Quilting, Needlework, Books, Wine, and Wellness. You can also find me over on my website, wendyjhaney.com. I will be doing more blogging over there eventually. As I get more of my videos done, I'll be blogging about those. But also, maybe you see some things that I'm making here and you're going, ooh, wow, I just don't want to make that myself. Well, a lot of those products will end up over there on the website that you can purchase for your friends and family. Once again, thank you so much for your support, and I appreciate you watching.